Hello everyone and welcome back to Kobean history. Looking back at a map of medieval Europe, you can see borders have changed quite a lot. You might be able to recognize some countries which would later become the countries we know today, but what's all this in the center? A mess of countries, many small, some big, all known collectively as the Holy Roman Empire. What happened to all these countries and how come they're not here anymore today? Well, actually, some of these countries do still exist today. But to understand how these remnants of medieval Europe survived, we first have to learn about what the Holy Roman Empire was and how these tiny states came together to form Germany. This video is part of Operation Deutschland, a collaboration of a number of YouTubers all covering topics regarding the history of Germany. There will be a link to the playlist in the description below and at the end of the video. So what was the Holy Roman Empire, also sometimes abbreviated to HRE? So the HRE was a collection of states that swore fealty to the Holy Roman Emperor, while the Emperor had authority over the empire as a whole. The states within were still mostly ruled and governed independently by the local heads of states. This made it so politics and borders of these states could shift and change, and they might even have conflict or disputes with each other, making it so the states making up the empire changed frequently over the ages. Some were taken over by others, new ones were sometimes created, and countries outside the empire's borders might choose to join the empire, or some states within might choose to leave. There were all types of states part of the HRE, some more powerful and influential than others. You had kingdoms, duchies, principalities, counties, bishoprics, free cities, and so on. Then there were also the electors, which were the states that decided who the next emperor would be, as the position of emperor was technically an elected one, not a hereditary one. As time went on, the empire grew more united, and the states within became more consolidated, especially during the German Mediation, which took place in the early 1800s. This is when a large number of states, especially the smaller ones, were consolidated together into more manageable, larger nations. This greatly reduced the overall number of states within the empire, from around 300 at the end of the 18th century to around 39 after the mediation in the early 19th century. Although the HRE was abolished after Napoleon came in, it was followed by the German Confederation, which in most ways was a continuation of the HRE, with the main difference being that it no longer had an emperor. Still, it consisted of many states ruling their own lands. In this confederation, there were two main powers, the Kingdom of Prussia and the Austrian Empire. Eventually, it would come to war between these two nations, followed by another war between the Confederation and France. In the aftermath of these wars, two separate nations emerged. The Austrian Empire had now become the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Prussia had gained control over most of the other German states bit by bit over the years, directly annexing some of the smaller nations and imposing its influence over the larger ones. This unified Germany into the German Empire under the rule of Prussia. While there were still distinct nations within the German Empire, their autonomy was greatly reduced. But hold on a minute. If the German states all united, what's up with Liechtenstein and Luxembourg? They still exist today and are a principality and a grand duchy respectively, both types of monarchies which were common in the HRE. In fact, both of these countries were part of the HRE and also part of the German Confederation after it. So how come that these two countries didn't unify together with all the hundreds of other German states which were in the same position? Both of them survived in different ways, so I will start by talking about Liechtenstein. I should also mention that the type of principality that Liechtenstein is different from the other principalities that still exist today, such as Monaco or Andorra. I have a separate video where I go over the differences in case you want to know more about that, a link to which should pop up in the top right of the screen right now. But as far as the principalities within the HRE go, Liechtenstein was actually a pretty recent one, being created in 1719, less than 100 years before the empire's end. The country came about because the Liechtenstein family wanted to be part of the Imperial Diet, also known as the Reichstag, which was a political body made up of representatives from all over the HRE with the aim to advise the emperor. To get a position on the Diet, you had to be granted a seat by the emperor. The Liechtenstein family were rich nobles who owned a good amount of land and had ties to the emperor, as the seat of their family was Castle Liechtenstein, which was near the empire's capital of Vienna. So in that aspect, the emperor would have no problem granting them a seat. There was one problem, however. While the family did own a lot of land, all of that land fell within other states of the empire, such as Austria, Moravia, Bohemia, or Styria, meaning that the rulers of these areas were their overlords, and they in turn swore fealty to the emperor. But the problem with this was that to be let into the Reichstag, you had to rule lands that had immediacy, meaning that the lands you rule are directly under the emperor. So that means the Liechtenstein's overlord had immediacy, but any lords below them, such as the Liechtensteins, did not. In this case it's even more confusing, because all these states in which the Liechtensteins had land were in regions ruled by Habsburgs, and the emperor himself was also a Habsburg, so technically their direct overlord and the emperor were actually the same person. Still, irregardless of who ruled them, the hierarchy of the states still meant that the Liechtenstein family did not fall under that imperial immediacy. For the Liechtensteins to gain imperial immediacy would be a bit harder to achieve. As mentioned before, all the lands they owned were in regions controlled by Habsburgs, so it would have been very unlikely that the emperor would have granted immediacy to the land that the Liechtensteins already owned, as doing so would take away from the Habsburgs' own lands. So the Liechtensteins would have to figure out another way to gain immediacy. At this point in time, they still had nothing to do with the country that now bears their family name. Those lands were ruled by the Hohenems family. And while their lands were tiny, they did rule with imperial immediacy. The Hohenems fell into debt and were forced to sell off some of their lands, and in 1699 the Liechtenstein family acquired the lordship of Schellenberg. Still, this lordship was under the county of Vaduz, so the Liechtenstein family still had no immediacy. But a little over a decade later, their new overlords, the Hohenems, which still ruled the county of Vaduz, continued to struggle financially, and they were also forced to sell the county. That was a chance that the wealthy Liechtenstein family would not pass up. And in 1712 they also bought the county off of the Hohenems. Now controlling both the lordship of Schellenberg and the county of Vaduz, the Liechtenstein family finally ruled some land under imperial immediacy. Their lands in the lordship of Schellenberg and the county of Vaduz were combined into a principality, which took its name after the new ruling family. And they finally gained their seat into the Reichstag. This was what they had desired for all this time, and they were not actually that interested in the actual lands that now carried their family name. Because apart from being a gateway to their seat in the Imperial Diet, the lands within the Principality of Liechtenstein was not of that much value to the family compared to all the other lands they owned in all the other regions of the empire. This can be inferred by the fact that the Liechtenstein family actually kept their family seat in Castle Liechtenstein near Vienna and did not move to their new principality. And it's actually said that none of the Liechtensteins visited the Principality of Liechtenstein until 100 years after it was formed. Now, I don't know if this is fact or rumor, but what we do know for sure is that it wouldn't be until 1939 when the Liechtenstein family actually moved to the Principality of Liechtenstein. And even then, that wasn't entirely by choice, I would imagine, as this was also when Austria was annexed into Germany. And as the family didn't want to be associated with the Germany of that time, it would be safer to move out of there. But now I'm getting a bit too far ahead in time. We're going back to the early 19th century, and just after the Napoleonic Wars, Liechtenstein, like most former HRE nations, joined the German Confederation. When the wars that led to German unification came, Liechtenstein officially declared itself neutral, but it did retain close ties with the Austrian Empire, unsurprisingly as they still owned a lot of land and resided within Austria at that time. Liechtenstein was by far not the only state to declare itself neutral, which you can see on this map marked in green. Also, the blue states are Prussia and their allies, and the red states are Austria and their allies. Yet a state declaring itself neutral didn't stop Prussia from incorporating them anyway in their new German Empire. But unlike these other neutral states, the advantage Liechtenstein had was that it was not directly connected to the other German Confederation states, say from its border with Austria. If Prussia was to incorporate Liechtenstein into its empire, it would have been isolated from its mainland by Switzerland on one side and Austria-Hungary on the other. As the principality itself would have brought little of value to the empire, Prussia didn't think it was really worth the hassle of trying to take it over, just to have a relatively worthless, hard-to-get-to enclave there. Liechtenstein retained close relations with Austria-Hungary, so why wasn't it just incorporated within that state? There's no concrete reason, but neither Liechtenstein nor Austria had a desire to unify with each other. Austria could have easily just taken over their smaller neighbour, but it would also have little worth to Austria to do so. When World War II broke out, and Austria was now taken over by Germany, and the Liechtensteins now finally resided in their own principality, they now aligned themselves more with Switzerland, and like their western neighbour, Liechtenstein also declared itself as neutral and retained its independence throughout the war. And that's how the country of Liechtenstein still survives to this day. While Liechtenstein, only surviving due to its location and small size, was nothing special compared to the other German states which made up the Holy Roman Empire, Luxembourg, on the other hand, was quite unique. In the Middle Ages, the House of Luxembourg had been quite influential, with a number of members of their house having been elected as emperors. Their lands being ruled with imperial immediacy, it started out as the County of Luxembourg, later becoming the Duchy of Luxembourg. While being quite important in the earlier days of the HRE, the fate of Luxembourg changed with the Burgundian succession. The lands of Luxembourg lost their imperial immediacy and became ruled under the Duchy of Burgundy, after which the Luxembourg lands successively became part of the Habsburg Netherlands, Spanish Netherlands, and Austrian Netherlands. Unlike Liechtenstein, Luxembourg, and in particular the fortress of Luxembourg, had great strategic importance, and neighboring countries desired control over it. In the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, the previously Austrian Netherlands, which had been part of the HRE, and the Dutch Netherlands, which had not been part of the HRE, were united into the United Kingdom of the Netherlands, with the Dutch Prince of Orange becoming the new king over these lands. The king belonged to the House of Orange-Nassau. Nassau was also a German state, so when the new borders of Europe were being drawn up at the Congress of Vienna, a trade was proposed to the Prince of Orange. He would have to give up control over the lands he owned in Germany, having been passed to him through his ancestors which belonged to the House of Nassau. And in return for these German lands, he would also be made the Grand Duke of Luxembourg, which would unite Luxembourg with the Netherlands in a personal union. Now, if you're not familiar with the concept of a personal union, it is when two separate nations, so in this case it would be the Kingdom of the Netherlands and the now Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, while technically two separate nations, being ruled by the same person, so functionally being the same nation. And this got a bit more confusing when Luxembourg actually joined the German Confederation, giving it a mixed rule, with it being administered by the Dutch in the name of the king, but militarily it was under the control of Prussia. 15 years after the United Kingdom of the Netherlands was created, the Belgian Revolution happened. A part of Luxembourg actually supported Belgium in this revolution, resulting that when Belgium became independent, it also took a portion of Luxembourg with it. And this gives us the borders of modern-day Luxembourg. Ironically, the modern-day Grand Duchy is actually smaller in size than back in the Middle Ages when Luxembourg was just a regular duchy, as it had lost territory a number of times since then, by France, Prussia and Belgium. Later on in the 19th century, the Dutch king found himself in some financial trouble, and France offered to buy the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg off of him. Prussia, which was in the process of unifying Germany at that time, objected to this deal, and England and Russia were brought in to arbitrate the situation. The conclusion was that Luxembourg should remain neutral and France was not allowed to purchase it. This neutrality would also mean that the Prussian troops that were stationed in Luxembourg, due to Luxembourg being part of the German Confederation, would also have to leave. The Dutch monarch would retain his control over the Grand Duchy, and the king was given some economic aid to help with his money troubles. And so it remained throughout the unification of Germany, and with the Prussian troops being kicked out, it was unable to incorporate Luxembourg into the German Empire. In 1890, the Dutch king died without a male heir, and while the succession laws in the Netherlands had been changed to allow for a female monarch, this had not happened in Luxembourg. And remember, they were technically two different states, so those new Dutch succession laws didn't automatically apply to Luxembourg. This meant that the personal union between the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg and the Kingdom of the Netherlands was now finally broken, with the Dutch monarch becoming Queen Wilhelmina, but as a female she could not inherit the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg, so that passed to Grand Duke Adolphe, who was the head of a junior branch of the House of Nassau. He actually had been a duke before, as earlier in his life he actually had been the Duke of Nassau, but as the Duchy of Nassau was within the German Confederation, it was annexed by Prussia during the unification. So to sum up, since the Middle Ages, Luxembourg hadn't been an independent state, instead being ruled directly by the Habsburg emperors. When the empire fell, it gained its independence but was ruled by a foreign king. Even though it was part of the German Confederation, it narrowly avoided being incorporated within a unified Germany, and now a former duke who lost his duchy to that unification once again ruled over an independent state which was once part of the HRE, while the new Grand Duke and the lands of Luxembourg had no direct ties to each other. Both were remnants of the Holy Roman Empire that came back together. Thanks for watching, I hope you've enjoyed. On screen right now you'll find a link to the Operation Deutschland playlist, so check out those videos if you want to learn more about German history. I'd like to thank my patrons for their support, especially my $25 patrons Parker Dye and G. David.